Welcome to this conversation, an interview where we are discussing how to build wealth. My name is Maya White. I am a research assistant with RPOP, Russell Place of Promise. If you are new to RPOP, listening, stepping into what RPOP is doing, we are Russell Place of Promise, a justice-based initiative focused on building Black wealth for residents in Russell neighborhood of Louisville, Kentucky by generating investments without displacement. Some of our wealth building goals, which is why Napoleon is here. He really helps us align towards those goals, are working towards wealth building and include but are not limited to addressing and innovating public policy, uplifting advocacy work to push for Russell residents to really collectively own neighborhood assets in their neighborhood, like property ownership, co-op businesses, community land trusts, innovative economic pilot programs. The list can go on. We could do whatever we want, especially with Napoleon. So going towards those goals, thinking about how we can be innovative and very much build wealth in the Russell community. We have brought on Napoleon from the very beginning. He's been with RPOP for 3 years, and he's going to introduce himself and his role as a capital strategist and consultant with RPOP. Hey, Napoleon.
Hey, how's it going, Maya?
It's going good. Good. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm really excited to be able to chat with you about a little bit of the work that I've been doing with the RPOP.
Okay. Tell us about yourself.
So, as you mentioned, my name is Napoleon Wallace. I am a capital strategist for RPOP. And my background is in economic development. So what that means is I conceive, finance, and implement equitable growth strategies for communities, businesses, as well as investors that are looking to create positive change at the local level. My background is as a banker, an investor, working at national and regional philanthropies, and then also working in government. And I feel like my recent role with RPOP is really got all the above. You know, I'm bringing all of those bodies of work to bear for driving equitable growth without displacement in Russell.
Thank you for explaining that and very much emphasizing building with communities and not displacing them, and really aligning with that as we grow as RPOP and as you grow with us. So I explained to you yesterday when they started like mentioning your name around me, I first thought like Napoleon, and I went first to like this French, probably colonizer, but he's very much taught to us as like this adventurer, this like risk taker in the world, this rebellious person. So when I think about like economic development and like these different layer of money, I really think of that as like adventurous and risk taking. So you really live up to the name of Napoleon to me. So we're going to get more into that as we talk about how do we build wealth. And the first question that we have for you is, can you tell us a story? How did you become this expert in economic development, capital strategy, working with banks, philanthropy, impact investors? What is your journey in this work, and how did you become this consultant in this role with RPOP?
Mm-hmm. So, you know, I would say that on the professional side, I've really been doing this all my career. My first role was working for M&F Bank, which is the second oldest Black bank in the country. And then going on to do direct investments for large investment banks. And then had a little bit of time in philanthropy and nonprofit. So work with the largest CDFI in the country on their leadership team, and then also led two Black-owned credit unions that were trying to manage their way out of a crisis. And then, like, most recently, with the state of North Carolina as the head of economic development for rural communities and workforce. So, job wise, I've been doing this for a while. I would say that prior to that, also grew up in this. My hometown is called Greenville, North Carolina, and I'm based at Durham. But I really grew up inside the West Greenville CDC. My dad was a board member. My aunt was one of the employees. I really grew up watching a Black community figure out how to own their assets, how to build net worth for themselves, and how to generate a community that was not dependent on outsiders' influence. Um, Also, I grew up in a janitorial service. My dad, one of his businesses was janitorial services. And in between cleaning offices, especially at investment firms, I made it a point to read all the investment prospectuses and books that were around. So I'd say that was first exposure there. Well, it's fair to say that's kind of in my blood and has really been my work for all my career.
I love that you talked about. First of all, I heard a lot of things about Durham and with community land trust. Like I've read a lot of things, so that's very powerful that your community brought that a part of you, but also like blood, family, those values, which brings in more than like the economic money side, but more like a social, communal, familial, like really Blackness and a part of your introduction to that. So that's very powerful. I guess, can you probably say that kind of introduced you to wealth building practices, or what exactly like introduced you into that, particularly like investment opportunities?
And I'd say that really working with M&F Bank, which was a Black bank based in North Carolina, knowing and seeing how deals were underwritten, but then also realizing that as a Black bank, there were ways to underwrite deals that had less to do with how much money you had in the bank and more to do with how much community or social capital you had, and whether there was a willingness to make a loan or an investment in someone based on their character, which really showed me there's a different way to do this whole economic model.
Yeah, it really brings about a lot of different principles and a lot of different ways of thinking about it, and not so much like this very kind of rooted white supremacist way of thinking
Mm-hmm.
about how to generate money. I really appreciate you saying that and bringing up Black banks, because there should be more conversations around that. So our next question goes more into something you talked about, like having that social capital, that cultural capital. In your opinion, with your work with Black banks and Black communities, what has prevented and challenged the ability for Black families or individuals to create, maintain, and pass on this wealth?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I would say that when you are thinking about Black wealth, it's hard to have that conversation without thinking about all of the white uh, privilege investments and infrastructure that's been made. It's hard to talk about the black white wealth gap without realizing that's a core part of our overall political economy. Addressing it means that we have to think about fundamental aspects of our economy and political system. Namely, we have to think about what are the ways that we have actively extracted wealth from communities of color, whether that be by redlining or whether that be by other forms of black tax, whether that be the criminal justice public safety system that's extracted fines and fees, all of those things add up. And all of those things are actively working to reduce black wealth. So when we look at, the lack of capital, lack of operating support, or any of those items, those are areas that city politicians and other leaders have actively made to reduce the ability for black and brown people to accumulate wealth. Now, on the other side, if you're looking at the GI Bill or any of the federal housing laws, in all those areas, white people historically have benefited. And until we're willing to call out those policy gaps and really make a point of providing access to people of color, that racial wealth gap is likely gonna persist.
Thank you for sharing that. That went straight into the next question. But I guess we can add on because you do have some work and experience with kind of addressing with city officials and governments about, and you consult on this matter of how we can change some of these policies. What are some of your suggestions when you walk into this space and you say, hey, this is problematic? We need to change it in this way. What are some of the things that may come up?
So, one, you have to make investments. And, folks will say, oh, we ain't got the money for that. We can't do that. That's a lie. Like, there's no other way to think about it. Last year, the US gave away $70 billion in corporate tax incentives. Those are dollars that are given to large corporations to make it so that they will grow their business, or at least try to grow their business in certain communities. Black communities didn't really benefit from most of that. And what we know is that those abatements are expensive, redundant, ineffective. And if you took that 70 billion and invested in small business growth, in education, in equitable health care, you would have a much higher return, both socially, economically, and civically. But folks aren't making those songs. So one would be investment. Two would be you gotta find ways to stop taking money out of the hands of black people. When you look at fines that are layered and burden black households, there's 7 billion every year in local budgets that come from fines and fees. Those are dollars that are coming directly from low, moderate income black, brown households. And they are, regressive. They burden black communities more. And if you can eliminate them, you're leaving more wealth. On top of all of that, I'd say you really have to think about what and how are we approaching who is deserving versus undeserving in communities. That goes to items like whether it's UBI or whether it's minimum wage. We can't create a community or a class that do not have access to basic needs only because we believe that they are undeserving. That's unfair and immoral. And when I go into these rooms, one of the things that I really push and I think should be pushed is how do we get away from thinking about all the assets, main financial, and really get toward people being the core asset of our community.
So many nuggets in there. I appreciate that response. It was so many layers. Especially a layer that I just really have high hopes for and have been able to be researching with RPOP is UBIs. And so just to give a little background for the viewers, last year, a former mayor of Stockton, Michael Tubb, started the Mayors of Guaranteed Income Initiative after he started Stockton's Universal Basic Income. Universal Basic Income is UBI, and he started a pilot program. And along with Mayor Tubbs, 33 other cities and mayors has signed to a pledge to start working towards distributing UBIs to their residents or creating this to be like something to talk about. So can you tell us what is UBI? And you said it a little bit. And how can that impact our families financially? And just giving that introduction to us really quick.
So overall, UBI is the idea that every human is deserving of income, whether that has to do with work, whether that has to do with wealth, that everyone deserves a universal basic income. That would take care of housing, food, safety, education, healthcare. And the idea behind UBI is that there have been numerous research studies done in communities of color, other communities, but the broad takeaway is that when you allow a household to meet their most basic needs and they don't have to struggle, they have better outcomes on every level, whether it be employment, education, housing, health, otherwise. So it gets away from this idea that only certain people are deserving of income only the folks that have made a lot of money, only the folks that have high-paying jobs are deserving of basic needs. And get more to the idea that if you are willing to invest in your people, you're going to have greater social and economic outcomes. One derivative off of that is the idea that maybe we want to go toward a $15 minimum wage. I believe that that is a great first step, but we know that employment outcomes are different in communities of color. We know that education and health and workforce outcomes are all different in communities of color. And so, in order to really be able to drive at the heart, um, delivering basic needs to all families, you really have to think beyond whether someone gets a wage just because they're employed, and really think about what are the needs of every household.
Yep, and that goes into a lot of your work in, I guess, in what you're sharing, your ideology, like people over money, people over profit, people over just what's already happening in this economic development space and system. So to go back to the question of what we can do now, what can we do now as a Black community in wealth building practices? Well, first, what is working? Like, what have you noticed that is working now after working with banks and working with Black centered nonprofits like RPOP? What wealth building practices are working now, and how can we add to that?
Mhm. So, one, I would say that there are myths out there that we have to dispel, right? The racial wealth gap has very little to do with education, has very little to do with employment status, has very little to do with household structure. So whether it's a two-parent, one-parent, extended family, multi-generational, otherwise. What it does have to do with is when a political economy, namely a local government or a state government, decide that they want to prioritize a group, that group gets the benefit. And whether that be housing, small business, and the list goes on. Well, one, I would say the political engagement and organization of a Black community is very important. And then when you're thinking about individual assets, entrepreneurship has been proven over and over again to generate wealth for individuals and for communities. The one issue, though, is that normally when a Black entrepreneur sets out, all they have access to is debt in order to get started. And that means that over the long term, if the business doesn't succeed, then they're going to have that debt burden for a while. No, one, finding ways to launch and grow businesses where equity or grants are the way that you're able to capitalize it And two, as we're thinking about, home ownership and other items like that, still very important. But again, if all we have are debt and leverage is the only way that we're able to acquire housing, we're really giving people more of an liability than an asset. So finding ways to buy in communities like Russell, owning in communities like Russell, where the cost basis might be lower, but also means you're gonna need less debt to get it done. I think that that's really important. And then lastly, if I were just, tossing out an idea or a few, I think that as we are engaging with our local leaders, really raising this issue of people over property, you know, in Louisville, we saw what happened when a community decided that they wanted, or when leadership decided that they wanted to prioritize property and development over people. And until we work that out of our system, where a police force cares less about the building and whether the building is, vandalized or whatever, and more about the people in it. Until we have that, we're always gonna have friction and a problem that prioritizes property over people.
I appreciate that response. And I appreciate your ideology because it's so consistent with just like keeping the people who have created this problem accountable. So thank you for that. We're gonna close out one more question, and just it can be a small like piece of advice, for folks who are wanting to invest but may have that little inch of fear or just like distrust with government actions, the things that we have talked about that highly affect like the market or us, being wanting to create wealth, but more likely to be in debt. What is just a piece of advice that you will leave us off with to have us kind of release that anxiety around investing and building wealth?
Mm-hmm. I have heard this numerous times in my career, and it's always proven out. Invest in what you know. And I would say that, when we think about how people are investing in Black and Brown communities, a lot of times it's someone that's not Black or Brown buying an asset in our community and then do a little bit of work and get the benefit from that. I would say, as residents of Russell, people that know the community inside and out, know the neighborhoods, find a way to invest locally alongside people that you know and trust and believe in. And I don't believe that will ever steer you wrong.
Thank you, Napoleon. This has been so grand. I've learned so much from you in just 30 minutes, and I kind of took away. I don't know. I didn't really take time. This was so rich. I appreciate you for taking time. And for those of us who are watching, just continue to think about and think through how to build wealth, stay connected to RPOP as we work through this with Napoleon in this endeavor to, build Russell together. So thank you, Napoleon, and hope to be in contact soon.
Thank you, Maya. Take care.
All right.